Hey, what's up, Liron here, and today I want to show you a very useful and fun exercise of taking a subject matter, a reference photo, whatever it is, and interpreting it into values. So I'm going to show you how I do this using this scene of the London Bridge. Hope you're going to enjoy this one. Let's get to it.
Okay, so at the heart of this exercise is the ability to interpret what you see into two values. This is a very important skill to have because it will allow you to discern shapes and better design them in order to create a more interesting result in your paintings, whether you work in two values, 3, 4, or just trying to imitate the value you see more accurately. And this is why it's so important to practice this with a multitude of references. In this case, we're using a cityscape, but also try doing this with portraits, as I have shown you before, with still life, with a variety of different references. Now, what I'm doing is starting with the drawing process, establishing the perspective. We're closer to the tower on the left, and so it appears to be larger. So all of the lines that move away from us are tapering towards the right, towards a vanishing point. I've covered this in the recent live video I did on perspective drawing. It's a bit complex, but if you try it out a few times, you will slowly get the hang of it. As long as you can establish a grid of fanning lines, you'll be able to draw it. And as always, feel free to use something like a grid method or even tracing in order to get your drawing right. Now, notice the process itself. I'm working from the large shapes, establishing the buildings as really blocks, and then, only then, I start dividing them into their different elements within. What I'm doing here is creating a subgrid over the building so that I know where to place the windows and the details and all of that. And now that I have the initial blocks and then the grid over those blocks that are just cube-like shapes, I can go ahead and start establishing the details. All of the mini towers on each tower, the roof there, the beautiful structure, really beautiful and emblematic or symbolic of the city. And even if I'm inaccurate at this point, as long as the first structure looks good and it works well, these mistakes are going to feel secondary. And this is an important point to have, especially if you find yourself being a little too lazy in the beginning stages of a drawing, or maybe you're impatient. Think about it this way: the more you establish a solid base, the more forgiving the drawing or painting is going to be in later stages. So getting these towers to all fit within the given perspective and composition will inevitably make them look good once done. So have that in mind. Now, my drawing is also fairly simple. I'm just dropping in the different shapes I see. One thing to note is that the light comes from the right to left. Now, this is very subtle, but if you look at the tower on the left, you will see that the wall that faces towards us more, or towards the right, is a little lighter than the wall that's facing towards the left. So light comes from the right, generally speaking. And this is how I'd like to divide the values into light and dark. The right side is going to be light and is going to stay white, while the left side is going to be darker and black. So after I'm putting in these final touches, just of the bridge and some of the background I'm going to put in just a moment, now we can move on to work on the painting stage. So here I am. I mixed a lot of black paint. And I kept adding more water and mixing and more water and mixing, and I did cut out most of it. Okay, so just have that in mind. I'm starting with the left section of the left tower, and again, as I mentioned, this is all going to be in the shadow. Now, for the drawing, I did run the video at double speed. Now we're looking at it real time. I don't want you to be in a hurry when painting and drawing, so just know that sometimes the videos are sped up, but now we're going to slow down and do things correctly and slowly. Now, when you're interpreting your reference photo to be different from what it actually is, it's really a huge opening for making mistakes. So I want you to be very forgiving with yourself, especially if you're still getting a hold on light and shadow and all of these concepts. It's okay, you will make some mistakes. and that's inevitable. And also, a lot of things are up for interpretation. So you may decide to darken something when it could have been lighter. You get to decide these things when you change things up. And this is why often it's very hard to give feedback and critique, because it really depends on what the person who did the painting tried to achieve. So that's another thing I want you to have in mind. Now again, the entire wall on the left is going to be dark, while the right is going to be light. And notice how I'm already putting in those details of the corners, giving off the feeling of roundedness. And in just a few moments, I'll also do the same for the other details that face towards the left. But what you want to have in mind is, for every area of the painting or every object within it, ask yourself, is it facing towards the right more or towards the left? If it's facing towards the right, it's going to be probably lighter. If you look at the left side of the hanging part of the bridge, I actually did it light. I painted around that because it does face the same direction as the wall that is lit. Okay. Now, if you look at this section, it's kind of a curved shape, which is very common for bridges. So what you'll have is a transition from light to dark. Now, I interpreted it a little differently. I took a lot of freedom, again, also in this little section. So again, you can do things a little differently. That's how I see it. And again, remember, when you're doing this exercise, the goal is to practice your skill of determining a binary value. Is it light? Is it dark? Okay. So that a lot of it is open for interpretation. There isn't really a right or wrong, purely right or purely wrong way of doing it. And you will make some changes, some alterations, especially if you compare it to my work. So that's how I decided to interpret it. The bottom ripples, I did go with a little darker, even if they're not as dark as the building. And as, again, I'm flattening all of the mid to dark values into black, basically. And it's also not really black, it's kind of gray. I did make a mistake of going a little too dark in one section, and it is noticeable, but that's fine. We'll live with that. Now, compositionally speaking, here I wanted to leave some gap between that roof in the front, top, and those mini towers. So you do see some white highlights. I may remove them later on. Sometimes the composition will trump the accuracy of the values. Okay, you have to kind of do your prioritization, and sometimes I decide to prioritize something over something else. Here I went a little too dark by charging some more black paint into the mix. I felt like the mix was running low, so I just mixed a bit more. One important thing is, look, I'm painting around that opening in the bridge. Okay, there's this obviously way of going through for the cars and all of that. You want to make sure to notice when a big shape is cut by a smaller shape. So in this example, the big dark shape that faces towards the left is cut by this round archway that is paper white. Okay, and I love this exercise thanks to its simplicity. It really is simple. You just mix a color and you go ahead and interpret lights and darks. This is a great exercise for saving up on materials. If you have any leftover gray paint, if you have these paints that you don't often use and you want to use them for something, that's the way to go, really, and it's a great exercise for that. So now I'm going to start establishing the buildings in the background, that bottom side of the bridge, and also that the hanging part of the bridge, which is really nice looking. Had a bit of a challenge with that. Again, a lot of it is up for interpretation, and a lot of it is fairly complex, and I'm painting rather small, which is another thing I want to note. When you're first doing this exercise, try working a little slower. It will really help you do everything and not be in a hurry to cover up large areas. It really is an exercise that, in my opinion, is kind of ideally made to be done small. So yeah, same goes for these ripples in the water. And again, I'm kind of interpreting it using crisscross lines, nothing too fancy. One big thing that will add to this some nice structure is the windows on the lit sides of the buildings, which we're going to do in a few moments. But before that, we have quite a lot of details to put in. We have this structure to the side of the tower. We have some structures in the background. We have this line that is in the shadow due to the roundedness of the corners. And I'm kind of using this opportunity to start placing in some more details. But here you see every side that faces towards the left, you want to go over and darken a bit. These lines that are based on the grid I put earlier, this is why this grid was very important. I kind of just added it in the perspective that I already established. Now, the more time you take with these details and the slower you go, obviously, the more realistic it's going to be, the more detailed, the more pretty in a way. For me, it's all about the interpretation for this one. Plus, I'm filming it for video, so I honestly didn't go into as many details as I could. I do hope next week to share a tutorial that's a little slower, a little more deliberate. These just end up with a long video that requires some heavy editing. So sometimes my go-to is to show you the quicker stuff, but I'll definitely be sure to do one like that. So here is the interpretation of these beams. Now, take into consideration, it's really hard to interpret these shapes just using darker value. Very often you'll see, and especially oil painters and people who work other opaque mediums, they will first establish the background and then they'll add the beams with a light over dark. We don't have that ability here really, so I'm going negatively at it as much as I can, and it's a skill I want to improve in my art. By the way, sorry for the background noise, there's a bit of construction work. It is a skill I want to continuously improve, my ability to establish things negatively, so that's how I'm going to paint most of the time, because it is the way I want to learn how to do things. So again, whatever you practice more, you will improve at, and that's an important point to take. If you want to practice this, if you want to improve in a skill, but you're running away from it, you won't improve. And that's a bit annoying sometimes to know. That's the harsh truth. Very often, you'll have the things you want to practice and the things you want to do, and you'll kind of leave the thing that you really hate to the last. Maybe you feel not good enough at it, not competent enough, but those are ironically the things you want to get started with. So if you have this thing that scares you, doing buildings in perspective, doing this exercise, whatever it is, you may want to tackle that first. I know it's hard, but that's how you grow, and it's a constant struggle in a way, and it's all about doing it every single day. I'm not different than you in this way. I just maybe started a few years before some other people or gained more experience early on, but it's still something I experience every single day. These things that I know I should be practicing, and it's challenging. There's this knot in the stomach sometimes, and I did receive a few messages about some people experiencing this. So yeah, it's all about tackling it head on, starting with it. And yeah, it's okay if you feel like something's not going your way. It won't. It takes time. So I'm going to remove the tape, show you the result up close. I hope you enjoy this process. The tape isn't going to have a huge effect here because the borders are pretty much white. But it's still nice to see it cleanly and without the border. And I'm going to hold it up soon. I also signed it just to show you up close. I really hope you enjoyed this exercise and you will make use of it. And now we can wrap it up.
So this is it once again. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this technique, and try giving it different interpretations. For example, in this one, I did recognize the shadow was here, the light was there, but try doing it a different way. Try seeing if you can invent in your own version the light coming from a different direction, or interpreting those borders of the shapes that you have here. But the main exercise, I think, to me, is in how to keep a very interesting composition with the shapes that you've created and you've changed from the original reference photo, keeping those shapes interesting in terms of edges and all of that, but also working again as a whole, as an entire painting. I hope this one works. Again, a lot of it is up for interpretation, which is part of the fun, but it will really train your brain in seeing those transitions from light and shadow. I hope you find this one helpful. Don't forget to check out, as always, link in the description box below to my frustration-free watercolor course, how to let go, enjoy the painting process, and get the results you want. Thank you so much. I will see you again in the next vid.